First of all, let me introduce the team of presenters. My name is Lida Walsh, and I am a head of solution at Harris Interactive, and I will introduce you to our high brand sustainability framework. Vicky Whiting, Director of Financial Services, will share with you some interesting findings across various financial services categories. And finally, Lee Langford will share with you a few case studies from the technology sector. For some time, we were thinking if traditional frameworks for measuring brand equity models are reflecting a modern way of marketing brands. There's evidence that looking only to brand equity and penetration is not enough to build a sustainable brand. Therefore, together with Aston Business School, we have developed a new framework for measuring brand sustainability. We still measure core brand health measures, which is brand knowledge, such as awareness, familiarity, and brand penetration, together with core brand equity measures. These measures reflect the past and present brand health development. But it is not enough for brands to be sustainable. We have to measure to what extent the brand will be future relevant. Is it going to evolve according to future customer needs and stay relevant with them? For a brand to be sustainable, it has to have good level of vitality. So what we mean by vitality? At first, there has to be some excitement about the brand. People must be eager to buy or use it and actively looking for information about it. Also, consumers have to have some sense of community with the brand. It means that there must be two-way interaction with the brand to allow any co-creation, and there must be some level of empathy, such as personal identification with the people who are behind the brand, or empathy with other users. How we calculate the scores? There are 13 core questions which feed into the high brand pillars, which were extensively researched and validated during the development. A mechanism how to calculate one number high brand score was identified, and it was proven that this high brand score strongly correlates with the marketing outcomes of brand consideration, trust, and recommendation, leading to the increased sales. So far, we measured brands across more than 23 categories, covering hundreds of brands. Some categories we track for 3 or 4 ways if we include development, and it's run every 6 months since February 2016. Each category is rated by 500 national representative consumers, and only brands consumers are familiar with are rated across all sustainability measures. New categories are always added as time goes. I have mentioned that one output from high brands is the high brands one score number, which allows us to compare brand sustainability across categories and within the categories. However, what we find even more interesting and give us better diagnostics is the brand sustainability matrix. The vertical side of the matrix shows us how strong a brand is in terms of its penetration and equity. The horizontal side shows to what extent the brand is future relevant. The first quadrant we call building brands, and this building brand scores low across all measures, and the size of the bubbles show the level of brand vitality. Those building brands are very low in terms of vitality. The second quadrant represents strong brands with high penetration and equity, but low future relevance. These brands show also very small bubbles, as the vitality tends to be not very strong. Challenging brands quadrant is very interesting. These brands are shaking the market and challenging status quo. They are future relevant, they have massive vitality, but they are still niche or very new brands. And finally, we have a group of compelling brands which are future relevant, have great penetration, and they enjoy high equity, and their vitality is very healthy, but not necessarily the highest. It's usually among the challenging brands. In February, we measured 15 categories We included some new categories such as price comparison websites, wearable technology, wealth management, some new FMCG categories such as crisps, deodorant, and fizzy drinks. And we calculated average high brand score across all the categories. And what you can see that consoles, wearables, and supermarkets are brands attracting the highest high brand scores. However, at the end, we have energy, gambling, and credit cards, which are failing. The top 10 brands in terms of our high scores are not surprising results. It's iPhone, PlayStation, Xbox, Samsung, BBC, Tesco, LTV, Apple in wearables. And iPhone, PlayStation, BBC, Xbox, Samsung, and Tesco are usually in top 10 brands across each way we measured. We have few newcomers like Wearable, Fitbit, and Apple in wearables. Looking at various pillars of the high brand, let's look at what are the top 5 brands in terms of penetration. Not surprisingly, it's BBC, Tesco, ITV. Top brands in terms of equity, they are led by PlayStation, Apple iPhone. Top brands which are most future relevant, against PlayStation, and here we have Fitbit and Xbox. And top brands with vitality are actually led by wealth management categories. So this is the overall introduction of what the high brand is, and I now ask Vicky Whiting from Financial Services to show some interesting results across the financial sector categories.
Hi everybody. Firstly, for the financial sector, I wanted to take a look at these index scores for the specific sectors we've been covering in our high brand study. And there we see that financial price comparison websites, which were covered for the first time this year, all doing very well, and all 5 brands that are covered in this market performed well, especially for being relevant and strong brands. Respondents agreed that they make sense to buy from, and they evolved to take account of their changing needs. So price comparison websites, the ones with the most prominent ad campaigns, tend to top the index. And second in the order there of the index scores was the wealth management sector, which was also included for the first time this year. And the ones that did very well there were those wealth management platforms. The better known ones especially were leading as the most compelling brands. They did particularly well on future relevance, which we feel makes sense in this fee-paying advice world. And below the financial sector average are perhaps the less exciting financial sectors of banks and insurance, and with the less sticky sectors of credit cards and motor insurance to the bottom of the index. And now for a look in a bit more detail at the banking sector. This chart is very intuitive, with challenger banks to the bottom right and showing greatest vitality. The challenger banks perform well on future relevance, the sense that they evolved to take account of my needs. Nationwide, which consistently performs well in research metrics, is the most compelling banking brand in our study, closely followed by Santander and one other brand. And I would now like listeners to use your voting buttons to guess which bank is sitting in the position of bubble A. And as a clue, these banks all have strong brand equity. They're considered future relevant. And just to speak for a moment about Santander, the one that this mystery bank is sitting next to, Santander, we believe, has done well from following the competitive 123 account. And while they've since cut the cashback offer and interest rates, we still see Santander brand doing well. So let's see how many votes we've got. Okay, interesting results there. Let's just share those results with everybody. So we can see that it's very much split between the 2 prominent brands of Lloyds and Halifax. And yes, you're very close because it is actually Halifax, and Lloyd's is the other mystery bubble of B. And just want to highlight RBS's position before we move on at the other end of this scale to these compelling brands. They perform lowest on vitality and clearly need to rebuild the brand image. The other traditional high street banks all have established brand equity, sit above the y-axis, but tend to be lower on future relevance and vitality. And it is the Lloyds Bank, the other high street brand, that is missing from here. This has moved firmly into our compelling quadrant since we commenced high brands in 2015. So now let's have a look at the chart with all of those brands revealed. So there we see that Halifax and Lloyds are both firmly in that compelling category. Halifax is actually joint top with Nationwide for familiarity and a strong brand, and Lloyds actually moved into that compelling quadrant over last year, and we really felt that was owing to the successful On Your Side for Your Next Step campaign last year. And the next slide will show the changes in positions on the matrix over the past 2 waves. So there we can see where Halifax has moved from and how it's moved further into the top right-hand corner, and also for Lloyds has moved towards the compelling category and remained firmly in that segment. Barclays has also edged into the compelling category, while NatWest and HSBC have taken a step back on future relevance, but they're both very much remaining in the strong territory. But it was Halifax which was the biggest mover this spring, reaching beyond Santander and towards Nationwide. The cartoon Hero TV ads appear to have increased excitement around the Halifax brand. And the next slide highlights the particular high brands measures Halifax has improved upon. It is also interesting to highlight before we move on, the non-movers. Post Office, for example, has little ad spend, and we see it remain in the same position, wave on wave, low on vitality. We do tend to see the banking brand movements correlate with ad spend in our high brand sustainability charts, and really, campaign effectiveness as well. Although TSB has slipped back slightly and reduced their vitality, which we found surprising from the amount of advertising, and this could suggest that their advertising is not having the same cut-through in the way that the Halifax and Lloyds adverts have. So just have a look at the particular metrics and how they've changed for the top 5 brands. And those key metrics Halifax has improved upon is finding solutions to my problems, which is a metric where the other big banks either stood still or fell back, and really liking people from this brand. And there we actually saw a rise for 4 of the top 5 banking brands. So it suggests that they're improving their customer service, or at least they've successfully conveyed this message through marketing efforts. And finally, just a view of the overall banking brand index scores. And this just shows that Nationwide how far ahead they are compared to the RBS, which clearly needs to rebuild the image. What is interesting here is actually one brand that we do cover in our research survey, but is actually missing from this chart because they have a lower response base because of the lower awareness. But actually, looking at the results for that particular brand, it's Think Banking, and they do very well. And actually, they would have, with a bigger response base in our survey, they would actually have the highest score overall. And we find that very interesting, and we will be looking to increase the coverage of challenger banking brands, and as the equity of them increases, they will increasingly feature in our high brands report. So now, to finish that, we're going to move on to Lee Langford from our technology sector.
Thanks, Vicky. As you said, my name is Lee Langford, I'm Director in the team at Harris that specialises in technology, media and entertainment, and I'll be providing an overview of 2 sectors that we covered in high brands for the first time in February 2017, namely wearables and gambling. Other sectors that we included in high brands this time are video gaming, television channels and services, smartphones, and mobile operators. And we now have trend data for all 4 of these sectors. So anyone listening that would like further information about any of these, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Our contact details will appear at the end of the broadcast. Okay, so let's kick off with wearables, because I think this is a really good example of why our 3 measures of brand sustainability are much more useful than traditional equity frameworks that focus primarily on the present and the past. Now, remember from Lida's introduction, wearables includes a couple of brands, Fitbit and Under Armour, that rank among the top performers across all categories on specific elements of the high brands model. Firstly, Fitbit, a brand that it's fair to say relatively few of us were familiar with, even just a few years ago, is one of the top 5 future relevant brands, ranked alongside giants like Amazon, PlayStation and Xbox. And secondly, Under Armour, which ranks among the top 5 brands in any category on vitality. And the wearables category as a whole, which has been forecast to reach $34 billion globally per annum by the end of this decade, is one of the strongest that we included in high brands this time. Games consoles, the only category that stands out as being significantly stronger, although this is to some extent, well, a large extent due to there being only 3 console brands, all of which are pretty well known to most consumers. Wearables, by contrast, is still a relatively new and exciting product category, and many commentators agree that it stole the show at CES in January. The range of products available is enormous, and newer brands are emerging all the time. I've already mentioned Fitbit and Under Armour, but we also included a number of other brands that some of you listening today will not be familiar with. For example, Move, Ethos, Xiaomi, Polar and Jawbone. And some of these made it into our brand sustainability framework, as you'll see shortly, but others don't yet have sufficient brand awareness to be included. Other well-established brands operating in wearables that we included are Apple, Samsung, LG, Sony, Microsoft and Nike. And we also included newer but established brands TomTom, Garmin and GoPro. We find in most consumer electronics categories that Apple manages to combine high brand equity with strong future relevance and vitality. For example, here in the smartphone sector, we've seen Apple and Samsung competing for superiority across 3 waves of high brands research now. And right now, there's nothing to choose between them, as you can see here. Wearables is no exception, and despite the problems that Apple has experienced with the Apple Watch over the last couple of years, it's still the most compelling brand in the category, for now at least. Samsung, Microsoft and Nike also have high current equity, but these brands are viewed as less future relevant in wearables, as is Sony. Fitbit, strongly associated with wearables through its ubiquitous fitness monitoring devices and apps, is viewed as being the most future relevant brand, and this is despite recent stock market challenges that suggest the company may have overreached for now. Other brands that are strongly associated specifically with wearables, so Under Armour and GoPro, also have high future relevance and vitality, but they're less well known right now, and these could challenge more in future if they can increase consumer awareness. And completing the picture are TomTom, Garmin and LG, which I'll talk about in more detail shortly. Whilst not all of the brands we included can be shown in our matrix, we can produce an overall high brand score for each and every one of them. And this demonstrates the high potential of some of the lesser known wearables brands such as Ethos and Move, which rank alongside Fitbit and Apple. Brands that perform less strongly overall include Garmin and TomTom, which are perhaps still better known for sat-nav systems than wearables, and consumer electronics giant LG, which has not been particularly active in wearables yet. And if we drill down further into the numbers, we can see that different brands have different strengths. So not surprisingly, Samsung, Microsoft, Apple benefit from greatest brand knowledge. Fitbit, Apple and GoPro have got strongest equity in the sector. And we begin to see some of the up-and-coming brands, Ethos, Xiaomi, Move and Polar, come more to the fore when we look at which brands have greatest future relevance and vitality. So in summary, wearables are shaping up to be an interesting and competitive sector with lots still to play for, and we'll definitely include this category again in the next wave of high brands later this year. Okay, so moving on from one of the strongest high brands categories in wearables, I'm now going to run you through one of the weaker categories when we make cross-category comparisons. I'm talking about gambling. In reality, gambling is in very rude health in the UK at the moment, and 2006 was a record growth year for the industry that's estimated to be worth in the region of £13 billion per annum. So in fact, the reason gambling is one of the weaker high brands categories is more to do with the number of brands operating that a general consumer won't be too familiar with, in contrast to the consoles example I gave earlier. Of course, gambling takes many different forms these days, so first of all, a bit of context for anyone tuning in today that's not familiar with the UK gambling industry, and I should credit the Gambling Commission for the statistics you're about to see and hear, which relate to full year 2015. So 45% of UK adults have gambled in the last 4 weeks, a figure which seems remarkably high until I remind you about the National Lottery, which accounts for a significant chunk of this figure. And in fact, the incidence falls to 27% when National Lottery draw purchases are excluded. It's worth noting that participation in the National Lottery draws has been declining steadily in recent years, so the overall growth that the industry has seen is particularly striking. And whilst much of this growth has been driven by online gambling, only 15% of UK adults gamble online at the moment, so there's still significant scope for further growth. And finally, in terms of context, one of the key developments in the gambling sector in recent years has been the number of rumoured and actual mergers and acquisitions, and this appears to be one of the key drivers of overall growth. And to give you just a couple of examples, the companies that were involved in big mergers and acquisitions set all-time highs in 2016, with Paddy Power Betfair announcing full-year revenues up 18%, and Ladbrokes Coral Group achieving a 20% increase on 2015. Okay, let's move on and look at what high brands tells us about this gambling sector. We included a wide range of gambling brands in the research, ranging from National Lottery, of course, through other brands which we might consider household names, and others that have emerged in recent years on the back of the boom in online gambling in all its various formats. Now, as with wearables, not all of these brands are sufficiently well known right now to appear in the brand sustainability matrix, and it should come as no surprise again that the National Lottery dominates in terms of traditional equity and knowledge measures. However, there are other brands that perform more strongly in terms of future relevance and or vitality. The group of brands here in the bottom right-hand side of the quadrant, the challenging brands, all have high future relevance and decent vitality. And I'll comment on just a couple of these. So Bet365, a popular brand with punters, with a heavy presence. It sponsors Sky Sports Premiership football coverage, for example. And Betfair is innovative as a betting exchange, and so the high vitality score that we see, as well as high future relevance, makes a lot of sense. Now looking at the grouping in the middle of the matrix, William Hill, Ladbrokes and Sky all have decent brand equity behind the National Lottery, of course, but they're seen as significant players either via their high street, online or combined presence. And Gala and Mecca Bingo form another mini grouping in the building quadrant of the matrix. But let's move on to look at the overall high brand score achieved by the various brands, including the ones that didn't make it into the matrix. So PokerStars, the #1 poker brand in the world, is one of these brands that has low awareness, but also a very clear identity among those who are familiar with the brand. And this pushes it up to #1 position. And a number of other lesser known but up-and-coming brands, bwin, Full Tilt and Unibet, also scored just as highly as the National Lottery. So again, this is another great example of high brands' ability to be forward-looking, as well as understanding equity right now. And with many gambling analysts believing that the industry will continue to be shaken by more mergers and acquisitions in the next 12 months or so, gambling, like wearables, is a sector that will definitely continue to monitor closely in high brands moving forward.
So thank you for your time and attention, and we look forward to sharing more high brands results with you in the year ahead. where next wave is planned for September 2017. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.